One of the initiatives that we are really excited to be launching next year is the Community Safety Leadership Academies at the University of Chicago. The academies will bring together police departments and community violence intervention leaders from across the country to the University of Chicago to receive a world-class education focusing on management and leadership. And the creation of the academies came out of two insights that we and others in the field have developed over the years. The first being that management in particular is a really untapped lever that police departments and community violence intervention organizations can use to build the capacity of their middle managers and their rising leaders, while not necessarily requiring a significant infusion of new resources. I think a lot of the conversation that is happening right now around reimagining public safety and how to more equitably achieve public safety is about funding levels, which is significant. It's certainly very important, particularly on the community violence intervention side. That's a field that has been severely underfunded historically. But there has been much less conversation about how to make sure that we are using existing resources as effectively as possible. So the management lever is a way to do that, to train leaders, to train managers in risk management, how to use data to optimize existing resources. That is something that we, over the course of our research projects and our relationships with various organizations, have identified as a really significant untapped lever in reducing gun violence and improving outcomes across the country. So that is one of the reasons why we're really excited to be launching the Community Safety Leadership Academies. And the other, I think, really critical insight that led to the creation of the academies is just the acknowledgement that police and community violence intervention workers throughout the country have been really, there's not been significant investment in their development and capacity building. Certainly the case for community violence intervention. That's a field that is on the front lines in the same way that law enforcement is in responding to this country's gun violence crisis, but historically has just not received significant resources to develop their workforce and can think about professional development. So we want to make sure that as these two sectors are being called on to respond to one of the most acute and tragic crises facing our country today, that they have the resources to be able to develop their managers, to manage their workforces, and to be successful in their current careers and beyond. I think what we are most well known for around the city and the country are the large scale research projects that we run, randomized control trials, which really try to precisely measure the impacts of certain programs and assign causality. But another aspect of our work is what we call technical assistance. And that is in response to a request from the public sector or a nonprofit organization or the media. And we leverage the data sharing agreements that we have to try to answer questions that people need data in order to make a decision. And one of the ways in which we have used our technical assistance work to further the aims of community violence reduction in Chicago is through a project called the Violence Reduction Dashboard. So starting in 2016, when the city of Chicago was going through a really historic increase in gun violence. In 2016, relative to the previous year, shootings and homicides increased by 60%. And that increase over such a short time period was quite unprecedented in American cities. We looked at data going back 25 years in the Big Five and mid-sized cities, and an increase of that magnitude was quite rare. It also resulted in almost 800 people being killed in Chicago over the course of 1 year. And that was a number that we really hadn't seen since the 90s. So the city was in crisis. And at that moment, the Sports Alliance did come together. The 5 major sports teams all aligned and came together behind initiatives that could reduce gun violence. At the same time, there were meetings taking place around the city with different stakeholders, civic leaders, philanthropic organizations, private sector, businesses, nonprofits, really trying to coordinate and coalesce around what we could be doing differently to save lives in the city. And one of the ideas that came out of those meetings and those convenings was the idea that the Chicago Police Department was creating these new nerve centers around the city, nerve centers in the highest violence districts, which would bring together civilian analysts and bring together data and bring together management practices, all in support of a more coordinated district level gun violence prevention strategy. And the information that was being generated in those rooms, in those nerve centers, was really being kept within the department. It wasn't really making its way out into community. So as part of some of the planning meetings and the convenings that were taking place in 2017, there was an idea that the Chicago Police Department could start sharing some of the data and some of the maps that they were generating about where shootings were taking place, where homicides were taking place, what we think some of the responses could be, or some of the motives, and how retaliation could be quelled. The Chicago Police Department could start sharing some of that data with nonprofit organizations, with the Human Service Agency in the city, really to ensure that they were also able to access information about where and when things were taking place, so that these other non-policing sectors could similarly respond and coordinate their response around data. And that is really the genesis of what we today call the Violence Reduction Dashboard. At the time in 2017, when this was just an idea, the Crime Lab was asked to put together a set of maps focusing on the kind of highest violence neighborhoods in the city. So Austin, Inglewood, North Lawndale, East and West Garfield Park, Humboldt Park, Roseland, the kind of highest violence neighborhoods, because that is where, just given the kind of concentration of shootings and homicides, there was a need for the most coordination and most data about where things were taking place. So on a weekly basis, the Crime Lab would pull data from the Chicago Police Department and send out this information to nonprofit organizations in these neighborhoods. And we received really good feedback from the nonprofit organizations. There were a lot of ideas of additional data sets that could be added or things that could be taken out to make the maps more easily accessible and readable. We received ideas of different visualizations. So there was a request, for example, to see the time that incidents were taking place. Were incidents and shootings taking place during the midnight hours, or were they taking place during the day? Because that would have implications for how nonprofit organizations, they should staff their workforce, and how they should try to make sure that they didn't have any blind spots. So there was a lot of iteration with nonprofit organizations as part of these very early stage maps. They were static maps. They weren't anything too fancy or digitally sophisticated, but over time, another piece of feedback we got from the nonprofit community violence intervention organizations was it would be really great, Crime Lab, if we could have access to these maps, not just once a week, because by the time we get the information, it's 7 days old. It's still helpful, but it's not real time. So that kind of request from the community violence intervention organizations led us to engage with the mayor's office and the Chicago Police Department to say, we think we should build a live dashboard that will be updated every single day, that will be made public, so that not just this small group of organizations, but literally anyone in the city of Chicago who is interested can have access to this information. We think it's really important to create this type of dashboard, and we can build it. So we invested a lot of time. Our team at the Crime Lab, we're not necessarily dashboard experts, but the team was really excited about the opportunity, and they put in a tremendous amount of time to code the information, to make sure that as we were pushing it out, privacy concerns were upheld, and that we were making sure that to include feedback from the nonprofit organizations that we were working in. They hosted countless meetings with community organizations, things like the font and the color of the visualizations. There was just tremendous amount of care and attention to detail. And ultimately in 2021, we launched the Violence Reduction Dashboard with the City of Chicago. And it is truly first of its kind in the nation. Chicago is one of the few cities that actually does a good job collecting data on shootings. And now Chicago is one of the only cities in the country that makes data about gun violence at this level of detail public with such frequency. So that is an example of some of the work that we, in partnership with nonprofit organizations and the Chicago Police Department, have been doing over the past several years. It started in 2017, and I don't think it's culminated yet. There's still a lot of work to make sure that the dashboard is being used by the stakeholders who have the most to gain from access to this information. I think there is even more that we could be doing. We haven't stopped receiving feedback about different features that would be nice to add, and different ways in which we could expand upon the initial dashboard work. I think there are other dashboards that the City of Chicago could make that would similarly increase the amount of data and information that various groups and sectors use to make decisions about how their scarce resources are allocated. So we're hopeful that the dashboard is just one of many partnerships that we will be part of going forward in kind of support of these public-private partnerships to address some of the city's most pressing challenges.